Alright guys, it's hard to believe it, but we are now at the end of our third unit, Nationalism Unification, and in this video we're going to take a look at division and democracy in France and see what's happening in that country, how it's changing in the 1800s. We're going to look at some social changes and political changes. But let's do a quick review first. So we learned that revolutions broke out in France in a particular year. 1848 was the year, and then revolution spread across Europe, if you recall. And as a result of this revolution, France's government changed from a monarchy to a republic. And then in the course of that republic, we had an election where a guy named Louis Napoleon, who is Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew, was elected. And that eventually resulted in a restoration of the monarchy. So that's where we've been. And that brings us back to Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, and his so-called Second Empire. So, let's talk about some of its achievements and some of its setbacks. So, one of its achievements would be the city of Paris itself. So, Paris is one of the most famous cities in all the world. It really is the heart and soul of France. It's a city that, millions of people visit. And Napoleon III wanted it to be a showcase city, one that just was kind of like the crown jewel of his empire. And this resulted in a lot of what we call urban renewal. So urban renewal is basically when you go through a city and you kind of clean out and clear out and rebuild areas that are run down, kind of clustered, and it just needs a makeover, basically, is what Paris needed. And so you can see kind of the before and after pictures. Older rundown apartments are going to be torn down and rebuilt. Neighborhoods that were kind of just bleak are going to be replaced by tree-lined boulevards. All new streets here. Everything in red were brand new roads where basically they just, in some areas just literally bulldozed through here and rebuilt a brand new street. Here's, again, another picture of the before and after. So if you ever go to see Paris, France, a lot of the stuff you're going to see is really the result of the work of Napoleon III during the Second Empire. Another consequence of this urban renewal was the installation of tens of thousands of gas lights, and this is what gave rise to France being known as Paris as the city of light. Broad boulevards. Very nice looking here in this impressionist painting. Not only are these wide streets really pretty, they were also designed with kind of a secondary purpose, and that was to help keep the government safe from a revolution. And you're like, how could a wide street do that? Well, if you recall, during these revolutions and rebellions, what would happen is the people of Paris would build these barricades to block the streets. Well, if you have a wider street, it's harder to build said barricade in time to, prevent the police or the military from passing through. So this was, again, designed not just to make Paris look beautiful, but also to keep the city safe from revolution. And here you can see the handiwork on all these converging boulevards and streets. And right here in the middle is the famous Arc de Triomphe, which was built to commemorate all of Napoleon, the original Napoleon's, military victories. You can see some people up there for scale. Down here there's a big tomb, kind of like unknown soldier type tomb, and kind of like a what do they call them, like everlasting flame. It's a fire that never goes out and all that. Another thing you'd see in the landscape, this is actually going to come a little bit later, after Napoleon III's fall from power, but it's roughly in the same time period, so we can talk about it. This, of course, is the Eiffel Tower, and this was built to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution. It is named for its designer. There he is, Gustave Eiffel. And this was going to be the tallest man-made object since the days of the Great Pyramids. And we see the Eiffel Tower, and we see, this landmark of Paris and France itself, and it's astounding to think that a lot of Parisians, the people of Paris, didn't like this thing. They saw it as ugly, as obnoxious, and frankly, a lot of people wanted to see the thing torn down, but thankfully, they didn't. Eiffel, by the way, was also responsible for creating the inner skeleton of the Statue of Liberty, which of course was a gift to the United States from France. There's the Eiffel Tower in all its glory. There's actually a restaurant at the top of the Eiffel Tower. And here we are looking at some diners, including President Trump and the leader of France, Emmanuel Macron. There's also a skating rink on the second level of the Eiffel Tower in the winter months, which is, a pretty cool thing. Get able to skate on the Eiffel Tower, right? All right, back to some other achievements here. So while France is developing under Napoleon III, what we're going to see is the country is going to help build one of the great infrastructure projects of its era, the Suez Canal. And what the Suez Canal does is it connects the Mediterranean Sea up here to the Red Sea down here. You can see that thin little line right there. That's the Suez Canal. It's going to be 119 miles long. It takes them over a decade to build. And this is an impressive project. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why would they even take the time to build this? Why would you want to connect this and this? And the answer, of course, is it saves time, right? If you're going from Europe to East Asia, in the old days, you had to go this way, all the way around Africa. And Africa, guys, is a tremendously huge continent. It takes a long time to get around it. So instead, with the Suez Canal, you can simply go this way. And you're going to save yourself some 4,000 miles of travel. That's a lot. And the Suez Canal is still very much in use. So this is definitely an achievement we can point to from the Second Empire. And this really shows the strength and power of France during this time period. Now let's look at some of the setbacks for France. And you might remember the Franco-Prussian War. We looked at this in the context of the unification of the German states. And we learned that what had happened was Napoleon III had basically been tricked into declaring war against Prussia, because Prussia had appeared to insult the French people. And then the French declared war, and it turns out France really wasn't prepared for this war. And Prussia really does a number on France in this war. And because of their defeat in this war, France is humiliated, and Napoleon III is forced to step down, and the French monarchy was abolished for the final time. It's never come back just yet. And there is Bismarck. You might remember the Iron Chancellor, Mr. Blood and Iron and Realpolitik and all that stuff. We've talked a lot about him in this unit. Now, during this conflict, what happened was the Prussian and other German forces surrounded Paris and laid siege to it. And the siege goes on for months. And it got, frankly desperate. People were so hungry during the siege that they were eating just whatever they could find, including animals like, cats and rats and dogs and horses. And they even killed and slaughtered some of the animals at the Paris Zoo just to try to find food. In the end, it doesn't really matter because Paris was forced to surrender. A few lucky Parisians were able to escape the siege in a hot air balloon, but most simply could not. All right, so let's think back, guys, to France. And last time the French government switched from monarchy to something else, of course, it switched to a republic. And that's what's going to happen this time. We call this the Third French Republic. And the Third French Republic was a pretty unstable one. It was one where, yes, it was a democracy, but there were all these different factions and political parties that competed, and not a whole lot got done. It was a kind of confusing mess. And so this led a lot of French people to simply think, hey, maybe we should bring back the monarchy again, because at least there was strength then. Now we're just a big old confusing mess. Now let's think back, guys. 1800s, late 1800s, the biggest rival France has, of course, is Germany, right? Germany was created because of the Franco-Prussian War. Germany had also taken those territories of Alsace and Lorraine right through here from France, and France wanted revenge. So there were a lot of French people who didn't like Germany. Why am I saying that? Well, because that's going to lead us directly into the biggest political scandal probably in all of French history, called the Dreyfus Affair. And it's going to involve the guy on the right, Alfred Dreyfus. Let's get into this affair. What happened? Well, it deals with something called anti Semitism, which is hatred of Jews. So the background on this is that in the 1890s, it was discovered that someone in the French military was selling military secrets to Germany, to the hated German rival, specifically plans for a new type of artillery piece, okay, a cannon in other words. And so the search was on. Who was behind this? Who was the traitor who would dare sell secrets to our hated enemy? Well, eventually, they set their sights on an officer in the artillery named Alfred Dreyfus, and he was convicted and given life in prison for selling these secrets to Germany. Turns out he was framed. He didn't have anything to do with this. And the reason he was framed is because he was Jewish. It was basically seen as, hey, you know, we got to blame somebody. Let's blame this guy over here who's Jewish, because Jews were a minority in France and easily picked on. And there he is being drummed out of the military, and they're breaking his sword over his knee there and ripping off all his medals and everything. And he's going to be shipped off to a prison island off the coast of South America called Devil's Island. Now, what explains this is something called anti-Semitism. Again, I told you this just a moment ago. Anti-Semitism is this idea that Jews are discriminated against and they're being punished for being Jewish. And there's a lot of sort of background on that as to why people are so angry at Jews. One of them is this really nasty sort of conspiracy theory that frankly is still alive with some people, that Jews are like secretly controlling the world, that behind the scenes rich Jewish people are, you know, they're all pulling the strings and we're just their puppets kind of stuff. And this wasn't just a French thing. Anti-Semitism was widespread across the world. It was here in America. It was obviously in Germany. It was definitely in Russia, as we saw under Alexander III, all the pogroms, those mass attacks and everything. So the reason this Dreyfus Affair really is able to pick up steam is because of that standing dislike of Jews in France. Again, anti-Semitism it's called. Now, this scandal has a pretty big effect on French society. It becomes a really polarizing political issue. And think about politics in America today, how polarizing they are. I mean, gosh, it was the same thing in France at the time. And a lot of French people found themselves in one camp or the other. One camp said, hey, you know, this is wrong. What happened to Dreyfus is a national disgrace. He was framed. We put an innocent man in jail. This is unacceptable. The other side said, well, he's probably guilty. And even if he's not, you know, we can't admit we're wrong because then we'll look weak. And let's just keep him in jail. So those are the two sides. Let's free Dreyfus or let's keep Dreyfus in jail. And you can see in this political cartoon the effect the Dreyfus Affair has on the French people. What we have here is a big dinner party, a lot of friendly people sitting down for dinner, and the man at the head of the table says, above all, let us not speak of the Dreyfus Affair, right? Whatever we do, let's not talk about the Dreyfus Affair. They have spoken of it, right? So someone brought the topic up, and it just led to mass chaos. And again, we can apply this to French society as a whole. It just became this really anger-filled, ugly scandal across France. Well, eventually, the people who are pro-Dreyfus, they were called Dreyfusards, they got the upper hand. And Dreyfus was given a second trial, and his sentence was basically thrown out. It was seen as, okay, he really was framed. And he was even allowed to rejoin the army. And he does. And he, in fact, was in the army all the way into World War I in defense of France. So, again, this topic of the Dreyfus Affair is much bigger than just France. It's symbolic of that anti-Semitism widespread across Europe and the entire world, and the plight of the Jews. Now, the issue is, well, if Jews are a minority in every country they live in, and that's why they're being picked, one of the reasons they're being picked on and discriminated against, what could we do to change this? And of course, the answer is give the Jews a country of their own, where they're not the minority, they're the majority. And this is something called Zionism. So Zionism is this idea that what we should do is create a Jewish state in Palestine, in the Middle East, in what's known as like the Holy Land. But basically modern day Israel is what this is. And this was an idea that was kind of just, you know, kind of background noise. It wasn't something a lot of people felt very strongly about, except for, of course, Jews themselves. And then much later, this idea of Zionism and giving the Jewish people their own country really picked up steam, and that, of course, is because of the horror and just the dreadful nature of the Holocaust, and there was more sympathy then. And so what you have then is Israel being created shortly after World War II, and this was the fulfillment of Zionism. Now, let me go back here just for a second. The father of Zionism is this guy named Theodor Herzl. He writes this book here, The Jewish State. And you can see as Israel is declaring their independence in 1948, there's Theodor Herzl's picture. He's, you know, kind of almost like a George Washington type figure for the modern state of Israel. All right, guys, that is it for not only our topic of how France was changing this time period, but our entire unit, nationalism and unification. As a quick reminder, nationalism is this thing that just explodes across Europe in the 1800s. It's going to lead to the unification of countries like Italy and Germany. It's going to lead to the division and weakening of empires like the Austrian Empire, the Ottoman Empire. It's going to cause tensions in Russia. It's going to promote new reforms and freedoms in Britain. And of course, it's also going to lead to things like the Dreyfus Affair, which is an example of nationalism working, you know, in a very negative light. And eventually Zionism, which is, you know, Jewish nationalism, basically. All right, we covered a lot of ground, guys, today in this video and the entire unit. So make sure you study your notes and look them over and prepare for our upcoming unit test.